a while. Right now, he's made all this stuff, and so he's gone in and he knocks the side out of it, creates a door, and he goes in and he sets it on shelves. And all this stuff is set on these shelves, and then and then he would close it all back up, and this clay kiln, he would start cooking it, and he would put the kiln up to 2,300 but the European Celsius. They would put, it was unbelievable, the high heat in this kiln and what it would take and how high he would get it. It would never be like in an oven, 400. It would never be like that. This was really up there. And so the heat was so bad, and the color of the pottery was very much like, this was in the nation of what is now known as Iraq. Okay? And so this was not in the city, and Daniel was not required. You know, when you leave the city, you don't turn the lights out and vacate everybody because you got to keep some people at home. Daniel was not required to be there. Daniel keeps showing up. That's one of the questions that I found myself having to answer as I looked at this, and I will give a better answer when I write the book. But I do recognize that Daniel wasn't there because Daniel wasn't given that challenge. The king saw his loyalty, and he loved him and everything, and Daniel was loyal to his God only, but he was not there with all these people to go through this test. Because Daniel's state in life was different. His requirements of life were so different during that time. So, as I see this, these three men were there, plus the fourth. And that one, we would say it's Jesus. The king here says God sent an angel down. Yes?
I always wondered, did they have glass back then? It was so hot.
Did they have what?
Glass. You couldn't look into it because it was so hot. So how were they able to see into the furnace?
The furnace was there, but they were standing away from the furnace. Remember, the question for those in Radio Land, the question was, for the first one was, why was Daniel not thrown into the fire as well? And then this question here has to do with, and that was because Daniel had other responsibilities and was not in that place and was not required to make that decision. In this case, talking about how were they able to see in, their glass would never have been thick enough nor strong enough to be able to look through to see the fire. That furnace was off. It would be like if the bathrooms back there were the furnace and we're standing back here because we don't have to get near the fire in order to see into the fire. And but as they did later, they threw men into the fire and they were burnt, and the fire pulled them in because they got too close. Somebody had to get close. That means people at a lower pay grade had to be the ones to throw them in. And so, anyway, we see here that the king said to them after they said, you just well throw us in the fire and he had said, we're going to heat this thing up hotter. And the last thing it said is, no God can save you from me. That is the height of arrogance. And that's one reason we know that Nebuchadnezzar is not ready to make a transition because he's so full of himself. And so it said, I see the king said, I see four men walking around in the fire, walking around. None of them is tied up or harmed. And the fourth one, this is in verse, in that dream he saw a tree. The angel commanded that the tree be cut down. This huge tree. And it was all the creatures of the earth would come to its branches. And it was such a glorious tree. And he was so taken up as he looked at that. This man who's so full of himself, he had built a statue so tall in gold. Now he is seeing himself almost as the tree. But he doesn't know for sure And he calls in the wise men, and nobody has a clue what this tree is all about and why the God of heaven has commanded that it be cut down. And then part of it that they didn't understand is, why would it be not only cut down, but then a stump be left and let it be strengthened with brass and iron. Let it be strengthened where that the stump that is left would be protected. And he finally calls in Daniel after he's called in everybody else, and nobody else has a clue. You know, you'd think after a while he'd get the memo and he'd just call Daniel first, but he doesn't. And so sometimes that's a sacrifice that we don't know how to take. When over and over you pass the test and you do the right thing, but then you're not given the opportunity again and again, there seems to be prejudice against you. I want to tell you, let it go. Don't worry about it. God will bring you up every time. And so it was in Daniel's case that Daniel was brought finally before him. And he said, well, King, I can tell you exactly what it means. Oh, man. And he stood there for a while. He was so moved at what he saw. He said, oh, that this were to happen to your enemies, not to you. I love you, Nebuchadnezzar, but you just, this dream is you. The tree is you. And God has ordered it to be cut down. And he's warning you that if you don't get your heart right, he's going to cut you down. But he's protecting the stump, meaning he's going to save your kingdom for you, but you're going to be turned out to pasture for 7 years. 7 years you will be out to pasture. Well, a year later it happened, and he found himself. One day he's looking out across the kingdom because he didn't get the memo. He thought he got the memo. He acted like he did, but he didn't. And now finally, a year later, he says, oh, he didn't choose those 4. He chose a lot of people. They were just the 4 we read about. But those 4 were brought to the fore. Strange play on words there. They were brought to the forefront because they were the most spectacular. They were the ones who, maybe other Jews were included as well. The only problem is they didn't make the same commitment Daniel did to the food issue or to whatever issue was going on. I don't know, because it doesn't really say, because Daniel wrote the book, and he tells about that. Yes, Christy?
I think his kingdom was so vast that he wanted people from each, to have some wise people.
He wanted flavors of people from the different nations represented. And the question for those in Radio Land is that why did he only choose 4 Hebrews to be in his inner circle? Did he choose others? Well, he did choose others. The only problem was they didn't make the grade when it came down to who's the wisest and the smartest, and they passed the test, their IQ's better, and they also hear from God. Man, that's a big issue right there. Do you hear from God? And I think sometimes we want to hear from God, we try to hear from God, but we just don't learn how to connect the dots. Anyone else? Or any other additional insight, brother? That's it. Okay. Anyone else have a comment that you'd like to make? His what?
His heart was not where it needed to be.
It was a lot closer at the end of chapter 4.
Right, yeah. But it was like last week when if we are in tune to our Lord, we'll get the memo.
Yeah.
And if we don't, well, there are consequences to our behavior.
Yeah. The thing about it, we hear nothing more from Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 4 is almost my parting letter as I leave, because the next chapter opens up with his grandson